and it's my absolute pleasure to be interviewing Ratna Sahay, not only because you are an awesome macroeconomist, but also because you're the first special appointee to the managing director of the IMF, and even more special because your mandate is to figure out how the IMF can encourage gender equality. So as a macroeconomist, let me ask you, why does it make sense to have a gender policy at the national level, and why does it make sense for the IMF to have one?
Thank you very much, Ines. It's a real pleasure to participate in the fireside chat. So let me say that it makes a lot of sense to have a gender policy at the national level for two reasons. First, gender disparities exist in virtually all countries, and they are large in many countries. The COVID crisis, as many have spoken, have worsened this inequality. Second, apart from the fact that it is the right thing to do, that is to eliminate gender disparities, there's a very strong business case. Many studies we have conducted at the IMF and others too point to the fact that a society that is more inclusive of women also tends to have higher economic growth, greater financial stability, and lower inequality. Now, when it comes to the IMF, it makes sense for us to have a gender strategy because gender gaps have adverse macroeconomic consequences. Under these circumstances, it is well within the IMF's mandate to establish what we call macrocriticality of gender-related policies and advise our 191 member countries how to reduce such inequalities. Our vision is to apply a gender lens to all our activities. And as you know, the urgency to close gender gaps is really immense. As you have rightly pointed out, it's going to take 136 years to close these gaps at current policies, and the COVID crisis has set it back by 35 years. We are concerned that there are few women in leadership positions, whether in the private or public sector. IMF studies show that women globally hold less than 20% seats in bank and bank supervisory boards and account for less bank CEOs. Even though there is evidence that having more gender balance leads to greater financial stability. Female financial inclusion is also associated with higher economic growth. Yet, studies at the World Bank show that women-owned businesses were more than twice as likely to have their loan applications rejected. In the public sector too, women tend to be poorly represented. Thus, a very crucial voice is missing for half the world's population.
Thanks, Ratna. That's very, very comprehensive. Now, I'm sitting in Dublin, a country that was bailed out by the IMF, as you know very well. And really, when the IMF sneezes, some countries get cold. So I'm going to ask you to explain to us what are the three main levers the IMF can pull in order to support gender equality within countries.
Thank you, Ines. The IMF can play a critical role in taking forward the gender agenda because our main interlocutors are very influential. They are ministers of finance and central bank governors. We can also play a catalytic role through our convening power. So how can we play this role? As you rightly point out, we have three main levers, and they are surveillance or health checks of countries, lending, and capacity development. When it comes to surveillance, one obligation all our 191 member countries have is to hold a regular, usually annual, consultation with the IMF. This gives an opportunity for the IMF country teams to analyze, assess, and provide advice on gender-responsive macroeconomic and financial policies. In 2016, IMF country teams began a pilot initiative to incorporate gender equality analysis into our annual health checks. Teams typically examine gender gaps in labor force participation, legal impediments, gender-responsive fiscal policies, and access to financial services. But we ourselves need to step up our work, both on the analytical tools and on country coverage. With regard to lending or programs, as we call it, the IMF can address gender inequality. To date, there have been 5 programs with some form of commitment on the part of the authorities to address gender inequality. Examples are Argentina, Egypt, Niger, Pakistan, and Sao Tome. Again, where appropriate, this lever can be used. And finally, capacity development. This is also a very powerful tool whereby we empower our members on how to address gender disparities. This began at the IMF mostly as trainings and workshops or peer learning events. In the past few years, we have expanded to include a few tailored technical assistance mission on gender budgeting, but we hope to extend our capacity development much more going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ratna. And just kind of moving back to what you mentioned about the conditionality on loans to a couple of those countries like Pakistan and Niger, what kind of conditionality did you put in? Just so we get clear on how you're, implementing.
So most of them, mainly what we have asked for is to have a comprehensive gender strategy. So that has been a starting point in most cases. And then, of course, we monitor whether they do have it at the time that we release the next resources, the next set of resources or funding. So that is how we have begun to work with these countries at this point in time.
Awesome, very, very interesting. Okay, and so I presume gender data is critical to getting that kind of analysis and accountability. What role does gender data play in, for instance, the FOSS, the Financial Access Survey, and inside the IMF itself to design more effective international and national financial inclusion policies?
Thank you, Nes. As you know well, without high quality data, it is difficult, if not impossible, to design good policies. So the Financial Access Survey of the IMF is quite a unique source of annual data on access to and use of basic financial services. It covers about 189 jurisdictions and it contains 70 indicators and currently spanning 17 years, 2004 to 2020. Over time, this coverage has expanded to digital services and gender disaggregated data. However, I should mention that in most economies, gender disaggregated data is not readily available or even collected systematically. Mm-hmm. In 2016, we piloted a scheme and we received data from less than half of the 28 participating countries. Mm-hmm. Of course, by 2017, 27 countries provided data. In 2018, we mainstreamed and published gender disaggregated data for the first time. This data revealed that while several countries have made progress in narrowing gender gaps, overall progress has been pretty mixed. I just want to point some excellent examples. Malaysia, that launched targeted scheme for women by microfinance companies. Chile introduced simplified deposit account regulations. India introduced the Aadhaar, a unique biometric identity, and made a strong push for new bank account openings, including for women. And then by now, the 2020 FAST data has expanded to nearly 70 countries. In some countries, actually, and you'd be surprised to hear, such as Chile and Moldova, financial access gaps have actually been reversed. But lending to SMEs led by women continue to be constrained. And if I may just conclude on this by making an appeal to country authorities to improve the collection and reporting of gender disaggregated data. And another thought is that I'm really beginning to get convinced that the effectiveness of policies which are based on high quality data should be measured not just in terms of the outcomes, but also how they affect cultural and social norms that affect minorities and women adversely. I really would like much more work in this particular area. Thank you.
Thanks, Ratna. And I will give a shout out to the Women's Financial Inclusion Data Partnership, of which we've been an active member for the last several years, and the IMF is also a member. And the fact that the IMF was integrating gender data into their FOSS survey as a pilot was very much as a result of participating in that initiative. Yeah, it is gathering momentum, this quest for gender data. And we believe very strongly, as you heard from the UK's example, that it has many applications, not just from the policy side, but also to engage the private sector and highlighting opportunity. Moving on then to a final question to you. Why is the IMF so critical in moving the dial on women's full financial inclusion?
There is a gap in terms of the work that is being done by in academia, other IFIs, think tanks, and that is looking at the macroeconomic consequences, the macro criticality, which is very unique to the IMF. So we contribute on the macroeconomic side, the macroeconomic and financial policy side, and that is critical because it affects the whole economy. So I think we can play a much bigger role in that particular area, but of course in partnership with others who are working in these areas, such as the World Bank, the UN, the ILO, EBRD, OECD, and there are many other partners and regional partners too. So working hand in hand and collaborating with others to push the agenda forward is going to be critical to reduce or eliminate the gender disparities. Thank you.
Thanks, Ratna, and it was such a pleasure to have you. We really appreciate it, and it's so.
Thank you.
I suppose it's so exhilarating to think about you at the top in the IMF giving this kind of advice and generating all that great analysis. So thank you very much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.